watching India Today Global with me, Ishita Mitra, and the big story we are tracking today is about Canada's new immigration laws. And the big question we're asking is, are these laws pushing the students into the fold of Khalistani movement? To give you some context, Canada, a country who's benefited a lot from migration, is now bringing in laws to cut the intake of foreign students. So for 2025, Canada will reduce international student permits by about 10% from this year's level. And this represents about 36% decline from 2023 numbers. But this is not the only issue. Earlier, Prince Edward Island, a Canadian province, changed its laws to reduce the number of immigrants suddenly. So this meant that students who had come to Canada in the hope of studying and working there are suddenly facing the threat of deportation. So to break it down for us, we have with us Daniel Bordman. He's a senior correspondent at the National Telegraph. Thank you, Daniel, for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So Daniel, let's talk about both of these laws collectively. How are these laws going to impact the students and foreign workers? If you could just break it down for us, especially people from India.
Yes. So in general, the immigration system in Canada is completely broken. And that's from our side of the border. The sentiment has risen so hard that even the Liberals who created this entire scheme have had to roll it back just a little bit. I mean, it's still absurd astronomical numbers. Cutting it by 10% is like, taking a cup into the ocean, saying, okay, we've reduced water levels by 250 milliliters. It's not going to do anything. Now, I will argue this is very, very good, hopefully, for the kids in Punjab to see some of these kids get not even deported or have their visas expired and come back, because the system in Canada is student visas, and we're taking in nearly 600,000 to 1 million of these student visas per year. We're a country of what was 30 million 10 years ago. We're now at 40 million. So even a country of 40 million taking in like 1 million students per year is asinine. Now, a lot of these students in India, you think you're coming to you're getting into a school in Canada, you think it's McGill, it's Queen's, University of Toronto, a real university that is internationally accredited, that would impress people on a resume. And these real schools do exist in Canada. Yeah. However, the majority of the schools that kids are getting accepted to, we're taking 600,000. They're already 600. I mean, that number is insane. There's schools in strip malls in Brampton, and there'll sometimes be like 4 schools inside a mall that share a location. There's one classroom that's never open, and they do one online course per week. And kids in Punjab, let me just explain. They're paying tens of thousands of dollars per year to get into these fake schools, right?
Exactly. They're spending so much to get there, investing so much, and so that is the result they're getting out of it.
Yeah, so that's where it starts, right? So you then get sort of scammed to go to these schools, and then these schools are fake, so they don't have living residences. So that's another problem Canada's facing in the housing is you then have houses which have like 25 foreign students living in them, all paying $1,500 a month in rent, right? So the rent on some of these houses is like $25,000 to $40,000 per month being paid, which is more than anyone could pay. For like any family could pay. So the housing market's being taken up by, students from foreign countries sort of being set to live like, you think you're coming to Canada, you're getting that lifestyle that you see in American movies. No, you're ending up sleeping on a couch or a floor beside, 4 other international students who are also sharing your couch. And you're sort of scammed into this landlord scheme. Then to get work in Canada, you need like an LMIA, which is a labor market impact assessment, which is a form that says that you can do a job that no other Canadian can do, and then the company can hire you. However, these are now being sold basically on the black market, where companies are getting they're subsidized by the Liberals to hire foreign workers over Canadian workers, which is what's driving a lot of people crazy. And these foreign workers are being double exploited again by they're being forced to pay like 10 to 20,000, some up to 30,000 for these MLAs. So you're paying the company to hire you, then you're accepting jobs below minimum wage levels, and then the government's also subsidizing the companies for doing this. So all these kids are being scammed and tricked. I mean, this is the economy in Canada under Justin Trudeau. This is the backbone of our economy. This is why I'm a big proponent of sending a lot of these people back after the visa expires, because people in the Punjab region mostly, and it's other ways, but a lot from the Punjab region, they need to know what it's actually like in Canada, because they're being sold a very very false narrative of what life would be like coming to Canada, that they need to know from people who've been there and heard it, like what you're about to get yourself into. Because again, this is what was propping up the Canadian economy. The governments are all involved in taking a cut. Again, the corporate benefactors that are tied in with the Liberal Party, they're getting subsidized to be part of the scheme, where they're also at some point scamming these international students out of, again, the LMIA money. So it's a completely predatory system. It's a long cycle that gets in the weeds, but I don't think anyone would be shocked to find out that with tens of thousands of dollars flowing through each student, there's people inside the establishment, inside law enforcement, taking cuts here, right? When you have an entire economy of criminal activity, you can't get there without people on the inside being part of it and on the take. So that's what we have in Canada. Canadians are starting to see the results of this. They're starting, especially during the pandemic, we were all kind of locked down, and the Liberals just ramped this up and pushed it to huge numbers. And then when people sort of got out of the pandemic and were let outside of their houses, people walking around Toronto and realizing that, like, most people here, like, have been here for less than a year. And like many of the, immigrants we see, like they don't even know what Canada was like before the pandemic. So one, all the social problems you got from like the mass numbers from outside the country that we just weren't able to integrate, right? We're a country of 40 million people. You can't integrate people that quickly. Like, we love immigrants as Canadians. We have this thing, but you can't integrate 1 million immigrants per year. You just can't do it at our numbers. And so the social benefits, and then as I point out, the housing market, because you have just, again, the only way to keep your house now is to open up your basement and illegally rent it out to 10, just to become part of the scheme, right? And if you're not part of this immigration fraud scheme, housing market scheme, rent and property and life is just unaffordable in Canada going right now. So Canadians are starting to really suffer from the consequences of what Trudeau's done over the last 10 years.
Yeah.
And they're starting to draw the connections back to this human trafficking scheme we call an immigration system. And so even the Liberals have been forced to, on paper, say, okay, we're cutting it back. Now, 90% of what we're doing is still an ungodly astronomical amount of people. We're just letting in unvetted, right? There's no vetting coming in on these international visas. We have, again, over 500,000 to 1 million coming in per year.
Okay.
And the U.S. had to do it for us. We just had an ISIS terrorist from Pakistan come in as a student at one of these diploma mills, we call them. And he was caught not by Canadian intelligence services because they're too busy looking for hate speech online or, trying to find, the mysterious Indian agents running around the country that are apparently doing whatever. So it was the Americans who had to find this guy for us because our intelligence agencies are asleep at the wheel and fundamentally unserious after Trudeau sort of pushed all these sort of, diversity and social justice as a priority in the RCMP instead of, stopping organized crime. So all of this is sort of, boiled up to the point where even the Liberals have had to sort of walk this back because 2 weeks ago or before Trudeau said, okay, it's too much. If you had said what Trudeau said 2 weeks ago, if you had said that 2 weeks ago and one day, far right, neo-Nazi, unacceptable views, fringe, un-Canadian, destroying our society, blah, 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 down the line. You're all the things. Now Trudeau's been forced to even say this out loud because it's so obvious, even to the most clueless Canadian, the system is broken. Because you just can't hide. When we're a country of 30 million people, and then you're a country of 40 million people, and 98% of that is immigration, you can't hide that from people that the type of immigrants that we used to see in Canada 10 years ago, it's very different than it is today.
I just want to ask you, you talked about the cultural and economic impact of such a high number of immigrants coming to Canada. And of course, the country has a right to decide their immigration policy. But I want to ask you that don't you think a sudden change in laws for students who are already in Canada, who invested so much, they came with the hope of studying and working there, and suddenly they're denied work permits. So I understand the laws that will start next year. right? But what about the laws that have changed midway for the students who've already graduated and now they're being denied work permits? So do you think A, it's sort of like cheating with them? B, who do you blame for this mess?
So the blame is mostly Justin Trudeau. This is the Liberals. There were a lot of people. I know the inner circle that was part of crafting the immigration thing.
Okay.
His chief of staff and that, but a lot of Muslim Brotherhood operative, Khalistani.
Okay.
A lot of them is running through that. And listen, I feel bad for the students who've been tricked and trafficked into Canada and screwed over. The problem is there's nothing we can do, because if we put in a solution to sort of fulfill the promises you were owed, then we'd have to do the same thing for the hundreds of thousands and millions of students who might not have come in under the same pretexts, and the economy will collapse. Like we don't have the ability to fulfill these promises. Like it's not like, hey, we're like Saudi Arabia where we just have $1 trillion oil fund kind of lying around that, okay, let's reach into our socks for some pocket change and fix this. That's not where the country is at financially. We don't have the ability to make it right with these kids. We just don't. So the only solution and the best case scenario is, again, I say, once their visas are expired, send them back and let word of mouth spread among the people in the regions, mostly Punjab, who've been the heavily most exploited. Let them hear from their fellow Punjabis what the Canadian experience is now, so they can protect the other people in their community from falling into the same trap they do. Because if we honor this promise and, oh, look, it's all roses in Canada, more and more people are going to come and get caught in the same trap. And then if you help one student, you're going to end up getting 10 behind him, stuck in the same quagmire that he was just a week ago. So it sounds unempathetic, and, that's not very Canadian to me. But we're at the point now where we have to be blunt and honest with these people. There's nothing we can do for you. You came into the country maybe on false pretenses. Maybe you were scammed out. Maybe this and that. But the system is broken. You
mentioned the Khalistani movement. So what we're seeing now is that so many students, because they're finding themselves in such a situation where they might have to go back, now they're going to these Khalistani rallies, they're documenting their presence. So just they could play that Khalistani card, to file asylum requests. So do you think the Khalistani movement, of course, which has been, tolerated by the Trudeau government, to say the least, is now using these students to push forward its separatist agenda?
They've always been using the students to push their agenda. Yeah. It was it's the design. It was designed, again, the Khalistanis are the main instigators of this mass migration problem and exploitation rate. And yes, this is part of it. So the system I've described to, these students coming in, right?
Yeah.
So think of it. You're getting exploited and you have to live in a house with 20 other guys. Right? You've been sold this narrative. You think you're going to the West to get a nice apartment where you could have, adventures with your friends, Seinfeld, then you go out to a bar and drinking and you talk to a girl and then, maybe you get her number and then you go back and then you think you're getting this life, but you're not. You're being sold into it. Okay. So there's two ways.
But you do realize there are also actual students, coming with this dream of working and, making just a better life for them.
Yeah. You're being sold the classic American Canadian dream, but then the reality of what you're getting into is different.
Yeah.
So there are a couple ways to get out of this. Okay. So the Khalistani, the big scheme they have is, okay, your visa is about to expire. You're going to be sent back.
Yeah.
Go on the streets, say you're a terrorist. And then because Canada's just broken, and even though the Khalistanis are committed the worst terrorist act in Canadian history, if you wave a Khalistani flag and say, hey, I'm a terrorist, by Canadian law, you're more likely to get asylum in Canada. You will make your brain melt to think on that, but it is Canada the way it is. Why? Trudeau, not my fault. No one thinks it's reasonable, but it's what we do. The other thing is the Khalistanis are deeply involved in criminal activity. So the other pathway into the Khalistan movement is, okay, you get all these kids in, you exploit them, you put them in bad living conditions, and you're 20 years old, okay? You've been sold a dream, and even want to come and work here, to some, they won't go for this, but to a lot of 20-year-olds, okay, you're put in this bad situation. You want a way out? You want to make lots of money? You want to have that pocket change? You want to get an apartment by yourself? You want to be a baller? Join these gangs. Run drugs.
Yeah, of course.
Run weapons.
And these are vulnerable students, and these are impressionable minds, so they can fall prey to this.
Yeah, it's a gang. It's like any gang. You force people into a bad situation. You make them desperate. You then come as the savior, right? One hand of the Khalistanis pushes them into a bad situation. The other hand come and offers them an out, saying, join us, you get money, you get status, you can move out of that basement. So it's a good recruiting tactic. So what some of these people actually become gangsters, and there's no enforcement. So fake paper. Oh, okay, they move you. Okay, you were in Saskatchewan in a fake school. Okay, you're now in Ontario. This and that. You're part of whatever gang culture. Like you just move them around, and we're so understaffed. And again, the Canadian security agencies, they're not worried about terrorism. They're worried about mean comments on Facebook. Like this is what the RCMP is doing. They're trying to say, did anyone say anything that we can deem racist on Facebook? Which, like, okay, racism is bad, but can the security agency like do something about all the terrorists, please? But no. So you have that. And then the other thing with the Khalistani movement is, again, they get them to wave Khalistani flags. So they self-indoctrinate, right? Oh, to stay in the country, you have to say you're Khalistani and keep going to these Khalistan rallies. And eventually you go to the Khalistan rallies with the flag, you get in this crew, you become a Khalistani too. Yeah. Because that's just the you're in. And
So Trudeau governments, of course, seems to have a soft corner for these anti-India elements. And you have described how the system works. So if you could just explain to us on what scale this strategy has been working, on what scale are these students being, accommodated into the Khalistani fold, and are they filing asylum requests? If you have numbers, if you could just explain that to us.
Yeah, so it's hard to get the numbers because, again, the asylum requests are being sent to Punjab. There was the interview, I'm not sure if you could show it. I'm sure a lot of you have seen it, where I can't remember his name, but that Khalistani MP is having an interview, and he's openly talking about the fact that it's he gets paid money and to write fake asylum letters to people. We don't know the numbers. We've heard thousands. Again, it's hard to track. Because the Canadian government isn't so forthcoming with a lot of this. But you do see that immigration consultants sort of advertise what to do online. Like, again, you can go on TikTok, you can go on Instagram, and you can find a human trafficker who will put on Instagram, this is how much it is to get into Canada, this is how much it is to get into America. And he'll post videos of people illegally walking into the US border, and then send advertisements back to India in Punjabi saying, these are the prices for this, this, and this. So it's kind of like all out in the open, where we have immigration consultants who will make videos saying, claim to be a terrorist, to get asylum, to do this, this, and this. How many of these students are doing it? Thousands. Do we know the exact number? No. You see, it's happening on social media. They advertise it. They say they're doing it. They advertise how to do it. And the Canadian government isn't capable of looking at people's TikToks or Instagrams of people committing crimes and saying, oh, this guy's openly advertising and explaining people how to commit crimes in Canada. Let's arrest him. He's breaking the law. Like, this never crosses the RCMP's mind to arrest the people involved in criminal behavior. It's such a foreign thought in the Trudeau government to arrest criminals.
How are you going to look at this situation?
The Trudeau government has one more year left. They're in a minority, so it could fall apart. But there are two parties they could work with. They could work with the crazy Socialist Khalistanis, the people who want separatism in India, or they can work with the French separatists in Canada. And they'll work with the Bloc Québécois. They'll give the French separatists what they want for a while to probably maintain power for another 10 months or so. And then you're going to get a conservative landslide. The Conservatives are up 20 points. Okay. It's a first past the post system. Yeah. It's going to be electoral massacre. The Conservatives are coming in hard. Now, what they will do when they are in,
yes,
that remains to be seen.
All right. I think you've, explained this in a very comprehensive manner, and you've outlined what are the factors that could lead to this rise of anti-immigrant sentiment, and what are the problems that Canada is facing because of a completely broken immigration system. So thank you, Daniel, for speaking to us and, helping us understand that how it's impacting the Khalistani system, and of course, how it's going to impact your domestic politics next year. So thank you for speaking to India Today Global.